David sat in his car outside a small blue house for nearly 20 minutes before he found the courage to walk up to that front door. He was 28 years old now, but standing on that porch made him feel exactly 8 again, small and uncertain, holding a single folder of paperwork instead of a garbage bag full of everything he owned. The letter inside that folder was the reason he had driven 3 hours to get here. A letter he had found buried in a dusty legal archive just 1 week earlier. One that completely rewrote a story he had believed about his own childhood for 20 years. He knocked twice, his hand trembling slightly. When the door opened, a woman in her 60s stood there. Gray now streaking through hair David remembered as dark brown, her eyes widening slowly with a recognition that seemed to take her breath away entirely. "David?" He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Mrs. Jenkins pressed a hand to her chest, tears immediately filling her eyes. "I have waited 20 years for you to knock on this door." David held up the folder, his voice finally breaking through. "I need to know what really happened. I need to know why you gave me back." Mrs. Jenkins's face crumpled completely. "Is that what you've believed this entire time? That we gave you back?" What David was about to learn on that porch would completely shatter the story he had carried with him through 7 different foster homes, and finally answer a question that had haunted him his entire life. Welcome to Digital Story Corner. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. David entered the foster care system at the age of 5, after his biological mother's struggles with addiction made it impossible for the state to safely leave him in her care. Over the following 3 years, he moved through 4 separate foster placements, none of them lasting longer than 8 or 9 months, each transition teaching him a little more thoroughly not to get attached to anyone or anything, because eventually, without warning, it would all be taken away again. He remembered learning, by the age of 7, to keep his few belongings packed loosely in a single bag at all times, just in case a caseworker showed up unannounced to move him somewhere new. Then, at 8 years old, he was placed with Frank and Linda Jenkins, a couple in their late 30s who had been unable to have biological children of their own, and had decided instead to open their home to foster children. From nearly the very first week, something about the Jenkins household felt different to David in a way he didn't fully understand yet. Linda remembered his favorite cereal without being told twice. Frank taught him how to ride a bike in the driveway, running alongside him for an entire Saturday afternoon until David finally stopped needing him to hold on to the seat. They hung a small chalkboard on his bedroom door with his name written across the top in Linda's careful handwriting. The first time in his life anyone had ever labeled a room as belonging to him specifically. For nearly 2 years, David lived in that small blue house, slowly allowing himself, cautiously, to believe that maybe this time things would be different. The Jenkins family filed formal paperwork to adopt him just after his 9th birthday, a process David remembered them explaining to him with careful excitement, promising him this would finally make things permanent. Then, almost overnight, everything fell apart. David remembered a caseworker arriving at the house one afternoon, informing the Jenkins family that a previously unknown biological grandmother had come forward, claiming custody rights, complicating the adoption process significantly. David was removed from the home within the week while the situation was investigated, sent to a temporary placement that was supposed to last only a few weeks. Those few weeks turned into months, and eventually years. The grandmother, it turned out, was ultimately deemed unfit to take custody herself. But by the time that determination was made, David had already been shuffled through 2 additional foster homes, and somewhere in the chaos of overlapping case files and overworked caseworkers, he was simply never returned to the Jenkins family at all. He aged out of the foster system at 18, having lived in 7 different homes total, carrying with him a quiet, deeply rooted belief that the Jenkins family, the only place he had ever truly felt wanted, had ultimately decided he wasn't worth fighting for once complications arose. David built a life for himself as an adult through sheer, stubborn determination, working his way through community college during the day while stocking shelves at a grocery store overnight, eventually becoming a paralegal at a small family law firm. He never married, never quite trusting relationships enough to fully let anyone in, a pattern he later recognized as a direct echo of the childhood that had taught him love simply didn't tend to stay. It was at that law firm, purely by professional coincidence, that he stumbled across an old, sealed file while helping research an unrelated custody case. A file that happened to share his own childhood case number due to a decades-old clerical filing error. Inside that file was a letter he had never known existed, one that completely reshaped everything he thought he understood about those 2 lost years of his childhood. The letter, addressed to the state foster care agency and dated just 3 months after David's removal from their home, was written by Linda Jenkins. In it, she begged the agency for any information about David's whereabouts, explaining that her family had continued fighting through every available legal channel to regain custody once the biological grandmother's claim had been dismissed. She wrote that they had submitted renewed adoption paperwork twice, only to be told each time that David's case had already been reassigned to a different family, that his current foster placement had priority, that reopening his case would create unnecessary instability in his life. David sat in that law office reading letter after letter, dated across nearly 3 full years, watching an entire secret history of persistent, desperate fighting unfold that he had never known existed. The Jenkins family had never stopped requesting updates on him. Linda had written to his school directly one year, offering to anonymously cover the cost of his class trip, after learning through a mutual contact that he couldn't afford it. Frank had shown up, quietly, to watch David's middle school basketball games from the back row of the bleachers, never approaching, simply wanting, in whatever small way the system would still allow, to see that he was doing okay. The final letter in that file, dated the year David turned 16, was the one that broke him completely. Linda had written one last time, learning through the grapevine that David had just entered his 5th different foster placement. She begged the agency, one final time, simply to pass along a message to him, even if reopening his case was truly impossible. The agency's response, stapled directly behind her letter, was a single, cold paragraph explaining that, per updated privacy protocols enacted that same year, sealed case files could no longer permit third-party message forwarding of any kind. Linda's final letter to him had never been delivered. Standing on that porch now, folder trembling in his hands, David finally understood the full weight of what Mrs. Jenkins meant when she said she had waited 20 years for this exact moment. She invited him inside, sat him down at the same kitchen table he remembered from childhood, the same faded yellow tablecloth still covering it after all these years, and told him everything the letters hadn't been able to fully capture. She told him that Frank, who had passed away 6 years earlier from a heart condition, had kept a small shoebox in his closet for the rest of his life, containing every single school photo they had managed to obtain of David through the years, mailed occasionally by sympathetic teachers who understood the situation. She told him that David's old bedroom, though eventually repurposed as a home office, still had one drawer that neither of them had ever fully emptied, containing a handful of his childhood belongings they simply couldn't bring themselves to give away, including a small stuffed rabbit David had slept with every night during his 2 years in that house. David sat at that kitchen table and wept for the childhood he had spent 20 years mourning under a false story, grieving a rejection that had never actually happened, only a broken system that had failed all 3 of them equally. Over the following months, David and Linda slowly rebuilt the relationship that circumstance had stolen from them decades earlier. He visited nearly every weekend, helping her with small repairs around the house, sitting with her on the same porch where their reunion had begun, filling in 20 years of missing context between them. Linda showed him the shoebox Frank had kept, and David sat on the living room floor, going through every photograph one by one, watching an entire childhood he thought he had lost, reflected back through the eyes of 2 people who had never actually stopped counting him as their own. David eventually left his paralegal position at the family law firm to become a court-appointed advocate for children currently navigating the foster system, determined to make sure no other child aged out of care carrying a false story about being unwanted, the way he had for 2 entire decades. He keeps a photo of Frank and Linda on his office desk, the same one from that final shoebox, a reminder of exactly why the work matters. He tells every new foster family he works with the same thing he wishes someone had told him far earlier in his life. Sometimes, love doesn't fail the children it's meant to protect. Sometimes, it's simply buried under paperwork, policy, and a system too overwhelmed to deliver it properly, waiting patiently, for years if necessary, for the moment someone finally knocks on the right door. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell. A brand new story drops every single day.